Oda revealed a huge secret, which just might help us to unravel the biggest mysteries in the One Piece world. Who was JoyBoy, and what happened during the Void Century? We recently learned that Bartholomew Kuma belongs to a nearly extinct race of people called the Buccaneers. And although Oda has only provided a few concrete details about their backstory, we can potentially uncover nearly everything there is to know about their pivotal role in One Piece world history based on their name alone. The real-world Buccaneers were a group of 17th century free sailors from the Caribbean, turned privateers who helped initiate the Golden Age of Piracy. Both their history and their ideals could very well serve as the basis for JoyBoy, the mysterious figure who seemingly set the entire story of One Piece in motion over 800 years before Luffy first set sail. In fact, as we'll explore later in the video, we may already have some pretty compelling evidence that JoyBoy was indeed a Buccaneer. But proving JoyBoy's race isn't the main purpose of this theory video, as the real question is what knowing JoyBoy's race might tell us about who he was and what the world looked like during his adventures. While learning about JoyBoy's race is fascinating enough in and of itself, even more importantly, the real-world history of the Buccaneers could help us solve the mystery of the Void Century. What happened to the Forgotten Kingdom? How did Imu rise to power? The tale of the 17th century Buccaneers may reveal some surprising and unexpected connections between JoyBoy and Lord Imu, which ultimately brought about the downfall of the Forgotten Kingdom. Understanding JoyBoy's greatest failure may allow us to learn from the lesson of history, and looking to the future, answer the question, how will Luffy and crew reawaken JoyBoy's will in order to overcome Imu's dark forces and deliver the world's new dawn? All will be revealed as we piece together the story of JoyBoy, using the real-world history of the Buccaneers to guide us through the events of the Void Century. If our goal is to chronicle the life and times of the Buccaneer JoyBoy, our first step is understanding the significance of this enigmatic figure and his connections to the lost epoch of history referred to as the Void Century. We know that JoyBoy was the key figure who defined this forgotten time period, which former Pirate King Gold Roger referred to as JoyBoy's era. Even so, details about his life remain few and far between, which should come as no surprise, as his name or epithet is only known to those who have read the poneglyphs, like Robin and Odin. The world government's founders, the 20 Kings, emerged victorious from the Void Century War, and erased all traces of both JoyBoy and the Forgotten Kingdom from the pages of history. Yet throughout the subsequent 800 years, the descendants of JoyBoy's friends and allies from all over the world have protected the true history, ancient weapons, and the One Piece itself, believing that someday JoyBoy will return in order to deliver the world's new dawn. As Whitebeard stated at the end of Marineford, someday someone will rise up to shoulder the burden of history and again challenge the world's darkness by inheriting JoyBoy's will, which the world government in all its might failed to fully extinguish. Rewarding the faith of all those who patiently waited throughout the centuries, Zunisha declared that JoyBoy had indeed returned as prophesied when Luffy awakened his Nika fruit on Wano, which essentially confirmed that the world's failed warrior of liberation previously possessed Luffy's devil fruit. After JoyBoy's downfall, by its own will, Nika, renamed the Gomu Gomu fruit, successfully evaded the grasp of the world government for 8 centuries, before at last finding a worthy host in our rubbery protagonist. In this context, we can assume that JoyBoy shared many of the same character traits as Luffy and Roger. He was a person who pursued and fought for freedom, and as Mihawk said of Luffy, his greatest strength was his ability to make friends and allies wherever he went. Accordingly, he made a promise to the people of Rigu Kingdom and the previous Poseidon that he would someday deliver them to live on the surface under the true sun, an event now prophesied to be fulfilled on a future promised day by Shirahoshi. The Minks of Zou and Samurai of Wano have also long awaited this coming new dawn, and we can further project, based on their celebration of the winter solstice marking the death and rebirth of the sun, that the Giants of Elbaf were also counted among JoyBoy's closest allies, who now in the present anticipate his return. But one key question which remains unanswered is JoyBoy's point of origin. Many have understandably speculated that JoyBoy and the mythic warrior of liberation, sun god Nika, are one and the same. Yet this particular theory runs into several notable problems. First is the simple fact that according to Dr. Vegapunk, Nika's name is still recorded in the very oldest manuscripts. It's worth noting that JoyBoy's era began roughly 900 years before the present, but recorded history in the One Piece world dates back at least as far as 5,000 years when the Tree of Knowledge on Ohara was planted. This tells us that the very oldest manuscripts, said to contain references to Nika, must predate JoyBoy by several thousand years. Or in other words, Nika is a much older legend than the now forgotten tale of JoyBoy. The world government has only partially succeeded in destroying the legend of Nika, while the erasure of JoyBoy is far more complete by comparison. This leaves us with the conclusion that the myth of Sun God Nika belongs to the ancient world which existed long before JoyBoy set sail. This tracks with what we already know about the world during the Void Century. The people of Rigu Kingdom were already forced to live deep beneath the waves. The Red Wall which divides the world seas had already been constructed, and wicked kings like the Don Quixote family of Dressrosa were already hard at work in oppressing peoples like the Tontada. At no point in time would we expect to see a perfectly happy utopia, but all of these individual points put together help us create a composite image of the world when JoyBoy set sail. A world awaiting liberation from forces of darkness and oppression, which, though they hadn't yet taken the form of the world government, were growing more powerful. JoyBoy, then, must have been a mortal man who embodied the will, dream, or spirit of the mythical sun god Nika, whom the world's people hoped would someday set them free. In the modern era, faith in Nika is nearly forgotten, only whispered in the wind by a select few. But in the years leading up to the Void Century, it's possible people all over the world were awaiting his arrival, fitting with the messianic imagery we'll discuss later. And by awakening his devil fruit, JoyBoy represented a mortal incarnation of this mythical figure. We know that devil fruit came into existence before the conclusion of the Void Century, as the Five Elders claim they've been chasing Nika ever since the dawn of the world government. How and why the will of Nika was bound to a mythical zone fruit is a question for another day, but this fact does further evidence that the struggle between the forces of good and evil, freedom and oppression, light and darkness, began long before the Void Century. JoyBoy was a person well equipped to fight for freedom, and thus, just like Luffy, was chosen by the Nika fruit to bring its will to life. So now we've set the stage for the ancient conflict of the Void Century, at the center of which was the enigmatic JoyBoy, wielder of the mythical Nika fruit and warrior of liberation. Unfortunately, we know that JoyBoy's efforts ultimately failed, and whatever dark, oppressive forces existed in the world during his time were galvanized, banded together, and formed the world government, atop which now rules Lord Emu. JoyBoy and the Ancient Kingdom have since been erased from history, though the tale of his voyage was preserved on Laugh Tale, and a certain group of people have maintained their faith that the will of Sun God Nika to set the world's people free will someday be reborn. And as revealed through the tragic tale of Bartholomew Kuma, principal among those who have preserved this faith in Nika are the Buccaneers, a race of people for whom the world government harbors a particularly potent grudge. Which brings us to the main thesis of today's theory video. JoyBoy was a buccaneer who sailed the seas throughout the Void Century, united many peoples from around the world, and flew the Jolly Roger as the world's first, now forgotten pirate king. He was the first person to conquer the Grand Line, the Sea of Dreams, which formed at the dawn of the Sea Circle calendar, and at the ocean's end, he discovered the One Piece, the key to turning the entire world upside down. In previous theory videos, I outlined the evidence that not only was JoyBoy a pirate, but the world's first pirate king, and that the ancient Forgotten Kingdom was a collective of peoples from all over the world united under his Jolly Roger. I further suggested that the One Piece was not created or left behind by JoyBoy, but something he too discovered, a treasure placed at the very end of the sea when the Grand Line first came into being many centuries before JoyBoy set sail. I won't repeat all of the points covered in those videos, but will be expanding on those theories in light of the new information we've learned about the Buccaneers. In fact, I think the very name of Kuma's lost race of people is the best evidence yet in support of those theories. With all that said, you don't need to have seen either video before watching this one, but I will put links at the end if you're interested in hearing more about either topic. Before we can fully chronicle the life and times of the Buccaneer, now known only by the epithet JoyBoy, let's first review what we already know about the Buccaneers in the One Piece world, and examine the real-world historical accounts Oda seems to be drawing on for inspiration, which just might tell us everything we need to know about JoyBoy's era. Though the word Buccaneer has become synonymous with pirate in the modern era, historically they were actually a distinct group of 17th century free sailors from the Caribbean. Their transition into full-fledged piracy gradually took place over nearly a century during the earliest phase of what would later be termed the Golden Age of Piracy, an era of history Oda has frequently drawn on for inspiration. Near the start of the 17th century, the Buccaneers began as a group of mostly nomadic hunters from French colonies in northern Hispaniola, who sold meat and other goods to Caribbean sailors of all sorts. In fact, their very name, buccaneer, was originally derived from the French boucan, small huts used to smoke said meat, mostly wild boars. The 17th century was the height of the colonial era, a time period in which European monarchies, including England, Spain, and France, sought to establish control over vast swaths of territory all over the world. Amidst a backdrop of fierce competition and frequently shifting alliances, the Caribbean served as a battleground, where each sought to stake their own claim to the rich resources newly discovered in the American continents. The prevailing philosophy of the age was no peace beyond the line, which essentially meant that whatever treaties were signed to keep the peace in the European homeland didn't extend to the remote colonies, including the Caribbean. Accordingly, around 1630 the French buccaneers were driven out by the Spanish and resettled on the more easily fortified island of Tortuga, which soon went on to become one of the Caribbean's most famous pirate strongholds. The Buccaneers were later joined on Tortuga by English and Dutch adventurers, who were also at odds with the Spanish. Their alliance initiated the Buccaneers' transition from hunters to robbers, as they began using small vessels to conduct raids against Spanish galleons returning home to Europe through the Windward Passage, a strategy pioneered by Pierre Legrand, who might even serve as the namesake for the Grand Line in the world of One Piece. Over time, as the Buccaneers grew in strength, they even began raiding ports in the Spanish Main. The French and English crowns, both seeking to weaken their rival Spain, began issuing letters of marque which sanctioned the Buccaneers as privateers, in return for a cut of their profits, much like the arrangement struck between the Seven Warlords and the world government in the world of One Piece. And just like the Seven Warlords, the real-world alliance of Buccaneers and English privateers adopted a new name, the Brethren of the Coast. Among the Buccaneers' leaders were French sailors Daniel Montbars and Francois L'Olonnais, whose name you might recognize as the partial inspiration for Roronoa Zoro. Further, while not directly confirmed, Daniel Montbar's family name also seems to have served as Oda's inspiration for adventurers Montblanc, Noland, and Cricket, which may be no small coincidence, as the story of Noland the Liar could model some key elements of JoyBoy's adventure. The Brethren of the Coast's leadership also included the Welsh privateer Henry Morgan, one of history's most famous pirates whose adventures were inextricably intertwined with the tale of the Buccaneers. England even sent members of its Royal Navy, like Christopher Mings, to lead and fight beside the Buccaneers. Between the 1660s and 1680s, their stolen goods were welcomed in the English Port Royal on the island of Jamaica, which quickly became the most prosperous city in the Caribbean thanks in large part to the Buccaneers. However, by the late 17th century, Spain's power began to fade, and the Glorious Revolution in England restored the long-standing animosity between England and France, making the British crown less favorable to the French Buccaneers. Further, a 1680 Anglo-Spanish treaty walked back the long-standing policy of no peace beyond the line, as the Spanish officially permitted England to trade in what was termed the West Indies. This meant that going forward, privateers were only issued letters of marque during times of war. The European monarchies also felt that they didn't have enough control over the privateers in their service, which resulted in several notable military failures. Resultantly, their letters of marque were rescinded, and the Buccaneers soon found themselves treated as ordinary pirates, no longer sanctioned by the crown. In One Piece, this could be compared to the fact that the world government exercised very limited control over the Seven Warlords. Although useful for a time, the failures of Crocodile, Moria, and Doflamingo, as well as Jinbei and Law's betrayals, ultimately contributed to their disbanding. Adding insult to injury, an earthquake in 1692 destroyed Port Royal, which had been the primary outlet for the Buccaneers to fence their stolen goods. With Caribbean Spanish ports depleted of resources from decades of attacks by the Buccaneers, and the European powers turning against them, many settled into more ordinary and stationary professions. But those Buccaneers who remained bound to the sea, despite the efforts made to suppress them, went on to join regular pirate crews, bound for the Indian Ocean, east coast of North America, and west coast of Africa. Notably, though the Brethren of the Coast fell out of favor with England's monarch, Welsh privateer Henry Morgan, who helped lead the Buccaneers, was rewarded for his attacks against the Spanish with a knighthood in 1674, which allowed him to later serve as Lieutenant Governor of England's Jamaica colony. So, before we move on, to briefly recap and summarize, the Buccaneers began as a group of free French sailors in the Caribbean around the year 1620, named for the huts they used to smoke meat. By 1630, they'd been driven out by the Spanish and gathered on the island of Tortuga, which began their transition into piracy. Joined by English, Welsh, and Dutch adventurers, the Brethren of the Coast grew increasingly powerful. The English crown then licensed the Buccaneers as privateers, and sanctioned their raids against Spanish galleons and ports throughout the Caribbean. Between the 1660s and 1680s, Port Royal and Tortuga, strongholds of the Buccaneers, grew prosperous. But as alliances in Europe shifted, the Buccaneers fell out of favor with the British and French monarchies, and thus were cast aside. With their privateer status rescinded, the Buccaneers became synonymous with ordinary pirates, completing a transition which began nearly 8 decades earlier, and thus their influence in the Caribbean faded by the end of the 17th century. Although the Golden Age of Piracy continued for several more decades, the Buccaneer period remains a unique chapter in the sea's history. Perhaps even more significant than the particular circumstances which prompted them to raise the flag of piracy was the unique code by which they sailed. A full century before the French Revolution, the Buccaneers were guided by the principles Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, or Liberty, Equality, Fraternity, the same ideals which later fueled the French Revolution. Thus, in a sense, you could view the movement of free sailors initiated by the Buccaneers as a sort of spiritual precursor to the later push toward liberty in the European homeland. In fact, the very structure of Buccaneer crews reflected the democracy which would later emerge on a broader level through said revolutions. Notably, their captains were elected and could be deposed by a vote. The crew collectively decided which ships would be attacked, and spoils of war were divided into even shares, with extra prizes awarded individually. Their crews had no regular wages, instead adhering to the principle of no prey, no pay, which ensured every member pulled their weight and together shared in the profits. We'll return to this point a bit later, but the very fact that a group of pirates and free sailors were guided by the same underlying principles as the French Revolution, which heavily influenced the Revolutionary Army in One Piece, reveals just how important Kuma's people, the Buccaneers, must have been in the lost chapter of history, during which JoyBoy, warrior of liberation, attempted to turn the entire world upside down. We have clear evidence that the real-world history of Buccaneers inspired not only the name of Kuma's race, as the general spirit of the Golden Age of Piracy served as a model for the One Piece world in the wake of Roger's execution. Yet we also know that the Great Age of Piracy Roger created simply reinvigorated a treasure hunt which first began 8 centuries earlier, initiated by Nefeltari Lily's dispersal of the poneglyphs on a fateful day which has yet to be fully revealed. This tells us that although there has been a swell of piracy over the past 25 years since Roger delivered his final words to the people of Logtown, the first stage of piracy actually began long ago in the time known as JoyBoy's era, and much like the real-world Golden Age of Piracy, it began with the Buccaneers. In the world of One Piece, the Buccaneers were not just an affiliation of sailors, as in real-world history, but a distinct race of people, with unique anatomical and physiological features, setting them apart from ordinary humans. Their distinct morphological features include proportionally large arms and small legs, with a barrel-like torso. Ivankov further indicated that the Buccaneers are part giant, explaining their large stature when compared to most humans. We of course know that all races in the One Piece world are genetically compatible, so we can safely assume that the Buccaneers have giant ancestors, though we don't yet know when they branched apart. So does this mean that the Buccaneers first arose from the land of giants? Not necessarily. In fact, quite the opposite. I think we can say pretty definitively that they actually originated elsewhere. The island of Elbaf is distinctly Norse-themed, while the Buccaneers of history were ethnically French and sailed in the Caribbean. It's highly unlikely then that Kuma's people were rooted on Elbaf during the Void Century, which is to say that their partial giant ancestry doesn't really help us locate their point of origin. Given the animosity the world government exhibits toward the Buccaneers in the present, it's a distinct possibility their homeland has since been destroyed, with survivors scattered to the ends of the earth, in which case there are a few interesting possible locations around which their society may have once been centered. including Enies Lobby, an island which seemingly met the same fate as Lelouch, Ruskaina, the site of an ancient civilization which has since faded away entirely, and an unnamed nation now lost beneath the waves, first shown in Jinbei's cover story arc, which just so happens to display the symbol of Kuma's paw fruit. However, there's not really any strong evidence suggesting any of these islands were once home to the Buccaneers. While we can say with some degree of certainty that the island on which Enies Lobby was later constructed was important during the Void Century, we don't yet know the chain of events which led to its destruction. Not to mention, the old buildings on the main island seem to be more appropriately sized for ordinary humans. Ruskaina is home to all sorts of fantastic beasts, perhaps inspired by the wild boars hunted by Caribbean buccaneers, but Rayleigh suggested that their civilization merely succumbed to the island's wild and untamed ecosystem, which doesn't really fit with our knowledge that the Buccaneers were driven to the brink of extinction by way of world government persecution. The lost civilization Jinbei discovered beneath the waves protected a poneglyph, and displayed the same paw symbol now associated with Kuma's devil fruit powers. But we don't yet have any indication that Kuma's ability is anyway historically linked to his now extinct people. Through JoyBoy, we can only really establish a link between Nika and the Buccaneers. In fact, the presence of sea cats instead supports the idea that perhaps this power once belonged to Alabasta's Nefeltari family. All of which is to say that while we have some interesting potential sites for the Buccaneers' island of origin, we can't yet reach a definitive conclusion. As we discussed, the real-world Buccaneers first gathered on Tortuga, and were also deeply connected to Jamaica's Port Royal. Both rank among history's most famous pirate strongholds, so it's certainly within reason that Oda would import them into the world of One Piece, especially given the distinct, real-world influences used in the design of islands like Dressrosa, Water 7, and Wano. In which case, maybe an island like Full Lead was built atop the former home of Kuma's people, given that it's a famous pirate stronghold much like Tortuga. However, as we'll discuss later, I think Full Lead likely played a different part in JoyBoy's tale. So perhaps most likely, the Buccaneers first set sail from a yet-to-be-revealed island based on either location, Port Royal or Tortuga. Tortuga, the Spanish word for turtle, is a particularly interesting possibility, given that it served as the Buccaneers' first base of operations. In fact, I could even envision a land atop a giant turtle's back, much like the island of Zou. There could even be a mythological basis for connection to Zunisha through the world elephant and world turtle concept Oda seems to have used as inspiration for Zunisha's design, which was even directly noted in one of the official One Piece magazines. Ultimately, while it's interesting to think about, the where isn't particularly important, as the entire One Piece world is dominated by oceans, and notable pirates have arisen from all corners of the globe. The Buccaneers could have come from anywhere, and it wouldn't really impact the nature of their story. Beyond their giant ancestry, we may also have some hints that the Buccaneer race is gifted with some special ability or power, which has yet to be seen on panel. In chapter 1064, Bonnie said that Vegapunk was enamored with both Kuma's muscles and his latent abilities. While the Buccaneers' incredible strength is likely explained by their giant blood, the latent abilities Bonnie mentioned haven't yet been revealed. We later saw Kuma inquire further about exactly what qualities differentiate his blood from other people's, though Vegapunk said he didn't yet have a large enough sample size to explain. This indicates that there's indeed something special about Kuma's people, which hasn't yet been revealed. Perhaps given their historical namesake, this power is what made them particularly adept hunters or sailors, qualities which, as we'll discuss later, may have been exploited during the world's forgotten past. In the modern era, the Buccaneers have all but been eliminated. It seems that Kuma may very well be the last of his people, with no biological children to inherit his Buccaneer blood. Saturn claimed that the brutal persecution of Kuma's people at the hands of the world government was justified by a supposed crime committed by the Buccaneers against the world in the distant past. Despite the terrible hardship his family and his people endured, the Buccaneers, including Kuma's father Clap, held tightly to their faith that Nika would someday arrive to liberate them from their chains. This is significant, as Vegapunk told the Straw Hats that nearly all traces of Nika have been destroyed, with the sole exception of the very oldest manuscripts. Yet despite this fact, the few remaining Buccaneers successfully passed down legends of Nika even into the modern era. As we've recently learned, the church Kuma inherited from his parents is centered around a crucifix, with the sun emblem placed at its center. I'll dissect this symbolism further a bit later in the video, but fundamentally, this informs us that the legend of sun god Nika is of paramount importance to the Buccaneers' history within the One Piece world. Inspired by his father's final words, Kuma always wanted to be a hero just like Nika, which he boldly proclaimed amidst the chaos on God Valley in the face of J. Garcia Saturn, who is perhaps in some form a demon from the ancient world, or at least a servant of the true devil, Lord Emu, Nika's primordial adversary. The Elder Planet coldly responded. That very sentiment is the reason Kuma's people were nearly eliminated by the world government. Their belief in Nika challenges the world government's reign. Saturn's words reveal that the Buccaneers throughout history have largely shared in Kuma's desire to embody the will of Nika by standing against forces of evil and fighting to set people free, just like the mythical warrior of liberation. So now it's time to put everything together. Our understanding of the role JoyBoy played in the Void Century, the real-world history of Caribbean Buccaneers, and all that we've recently learned about the plight of Kuma's people, which combined form a clear picture of history's lost pirate king JoyBoy, a member of the Buccaneer race and the first person to discover the legendary treasure One Piece. Let's start at the beginning. Who were the Buccaneers in the world of One Piece, and where do they come from? If their historical namesake is any indication, we can intuit that Kuma's people were likely seafaring, possibly nomadic hunters. Seems fitting enough that Luffy's predecessor started his journey as a hunter of giant wild boars. The Buccaneers' large stature and Ivankov's statement tell us that they're part giant but have mixed ancestry. The important point here is that JoyBoy's people, the Buccaneers, began as a group of nomadic hunters, with no connection to the Jolly Roger. The question then is what series of events eventually led JoyBoy to raise the flag of piracy. Our story began roughly 900 years ago, somewhere between the years 600 and 700 Kaienreki. The Buccaneers were a group of mighty hunters, descended from the giants of Elbaf. In fact, the Buccaneers were so powerful that other nations, led by wicked kings, began to envy their wealth and success. The world wasn't perfect at the dawn of JoyBoy's era, not even close. In fact, many people from around the world were patiently awaiting a hero, a warrior of liberation, who would come and set them free from captivity. Accordingly, despite efforts made to suppress them and drive them away, the Buccaneers held tightly to their belief that Nika would someday arrive, just as the legends foretold from long ago, dating back all the way to the dawn of recorded history in the antique Age of Heaven. The Buccaneers were centered on an island I'll refer to as Tortuga, but most prominent among them was a young man who dreamed of sailing all the way to the end of the sea. And though his name is now forgotten, his epithet JoyBoy has been permanently etched into the indestructible poneglyphs. JoyBoy was a buccaneer in whom flowed the blood of giants, explaining why his tale spans a full century. Importantly, he was appropriately sized to wear the giant straw hat now hidden away in Emu's vault. Too large for a human, but too small for a giant. Just right for a buccaneer. The legend of a treasure at the end of the sea predates Goldie Roger. And if the lyrics of the song Bing Saki are any indication, may be as old as the Grand Line itself. In the past, I speculated that the Grand Line, or the Sea Circle, came into being somewhere between 1500 and 1600 years before the present, or in other words, 600 to 700 years before JoyBoy sailed the seas. I based this on the fact that the world's current dating system, Kaienreki, or the Age of the Sea Circle, dates back between 1500 and 1600 years. It seems like a reasonable conclusion then that the birth or creation of the Grand Line, the Sea Circle, marks the start of this current epoch. It further appears that the Grand Line was constructed for the purpose of guiding the world toward freedom. Its most important function is in protecting the treasure hidden at the very end of the sea, and raising up a worthy hero capable of utilizing the One Piece to liberate the world. Which is to say that the One Piece wasn't originally JoyBoy's treasure. It was something which he too discovered. A relic belonging to or created by the people or entity which gave rise to the Grand Line itself. This is a topic I've already discussed at length in my previous theory video about the Sea Dragon of Legend, but the reason I bring this up now is so that we can set the stage for JoyBoy's great adventure in pursuit of this legendary treasure. As noted, the Buccaneers were a seafaring people, and JoyBoy set out in pursuit of the treasure hidden at the very end of the ocean. But just like Roger and Luffy, likely cared little for things made of silver and gold. If real-world history tells us anything, it's that the Buccaneers were once privateers, serving at the behest of a yet unnamed monarch, just as the French Buccaneers were licensed to attack the Spanish by the authority of the British Crown. For JoyBoy, the romance of adventure and discovery was enough motivation in and of itself. And fittingly, as a privateer, he fully intended to deliver the material wealth hidden on the final island back to the monarch under whose flag he sailed. So then JoyBoy's voyage began 900 years before Luffy's, at the dawn of the Void Century. The Buccaneers, centered on Tortuga, were sanctioned as privateers, and one particularly intrepid member of their tribe took it upon himself to seek out the legendary treasure hidden at the end of the Grand Line. He promised to return the wealth he discovered back to the king under whose flag his people sailed. But things changed as JoyBoy saw the world, and learned much about the people's suffering. He learned that the people of Rigu Kingdom desired to leave their watery prison deep beneath the waves, and made a promise to their princess that someday he would help guide them to the surface. He saw the Tontada oppressed by the wicked Don Quixote family. He met the Minks of Zo and formed a bond with the island-sized elephant Zunisha. He traveled to the old Wano, now hidden deep beneath the waves, where he promised to deliver the world's new dawn, and in return was gifted a straw hat, woven in the predecessor to Amigasa Village. In turn, he developed a vision for a world transformed, a world free of wicked kings and queens where no one goes hungry. And then, upon discovery of the treasure, he learned its true nature and ultimate purpose, to upend the current structure of the world in the very way he envisioned thanks to his travels. Now, it's entirely possible that during JoyBoy's age, the island of Laugh-Tale hadn't yet come into being. Inurushi told the Straw Hats that they would learn about the society which gave rise to the poneglyphs on Lodestar. So maybe Lodestar, the natural endpoint of the log's path, was once the final island, though of course that remains entirely speculation. It's here worth remembering the tale of Nolan the Liar, introduced in the same Skypiea story arc which first foreshadowed the legendary warrior of liberation Sun God Nika. Nolan also sailed under the flag of the Livneal Kingdom. He attempted to bring his king, whom he believed to be honorable, back to the land where he discovered the City of Gold, but was subsequently executed for his perceived lie when the city disappeared into the clouds above. I'm not suggesting the same exact event occurred, but JoyBoy's refusal to hand over the One Piece could be construed by his monarch as a similar betrayal. Maybe JoyBoy even tried to petition the king he served, hoping or even expecting that he would be fully on board with the positive changes JoyBoy hoped to enact. But just like Noland, it was only then he realized the true cruel nature of the monarch whom he served. It's then that JoyBoy realized he couldn't hand over the treasure he discovered, the One Piece, and instead was forced to take matters into his own hands. JoyBoy bonded with many people around the world throughout his voyage. The fishermen of Rigu Kingdom, the samurai of Wano, the Minks of Zo, and the giants of Elbaf chief among them. He also awakened the Nika fruit, channeling the will of the mythical warrior of liberation, just like Luffy in the modern era. How exactly JoyBoy came across the Nika fruit in the first place is a tale for another day, but it's no small coincidence that the fruit would have chosen a person from the Buccaneer clan, an adherent of the Nika faith, which still motivates his descendant Kuma in the modern era. Now wait, you might be saying the Buccaneers have a distinct appearance, broad shoulders and small legs, which significantly differs from the silhouettes we've seen of Sun God Nika. That's true, but it's important to remember that Nika and JoyBoy are not the same entity. JoyBoy's been completely erased along with the Forgotten Kingdom, with the poneglyphs serving as the only remaining record of their existence. While the world government's taken extreme measures to erase Nika, according to Vegapunk, the name of the warrior of liberation may still be found in some of the very oldest manuscripts, dating back at least as far as 5,000 years. So again, I emphasize that Nika likely predates JoyBoy by several thousand years. This tells us that the faith of Nika upon which Kuma's family built their church is likely rooted in the Age of Heaven. The Nika fruit last awakened hundreds of years ago according to the Five Elders, and Zunisha recognized JoyBoy's return through the beating drums of liberation. This tells us that though JoyBoy wasn't himself the mythical sun god Nika, he was nevertheless able to awaken the Nika fruit's power before Luffy. Luffy awakened Nika while fighting to liberate Wano from Kaido and Orochi. Accordingly, JoyBoy may have also awakened this power at a pivotal moment, perhaps even upon his discovery of One Piece, when he began to fight back against the world's wicked and oppressive forces of darkness. Unable to sway the king who first prompted his departure to champion his vision for the world transformed, JoyBoy sailed his own flag bearing the skull and crossbones, the grinning Jolly Roger, a flag symbolizing people's deep hunger for freedom, which was flown all over the world by those who shared in JoyBoy's vision. Importantly, all nations allied with JoyBoy also flew the flag of liberation, the emblem of the sun, representing Sun God Nika. This symbol has already been seen on Alabasta, Jaya, Fishman Island, Zo, and Wano. As I explained in my previous theory video, I believe this pirate nation may have taken inspiration from the real-world legend of Libertalia. Although the Caribbean Buccaneers weren't directly associated with the Libertalia of legend, this fabled pirate colony nevertheless belongs to the same time period, the Golden Age of Piracy. And so JoyBoy became the world's first pirate king, a rival to the monarch who first sanctioned the Buccaneers to set sail and implored him to find the treasure hidden on the final island. Now here's the twist. Who was this mysterious king that JoyBoy betrayed? Saint Imu of the Nerona dynasty, an enemy of freedom and the sea, who wanted the One Piece for his own purposes, but was unable to claim the treasure hidden on the final island on his own. And interestingly, we may already have some direct evidence which just might prove this connection between Imu and the Buccaneers. Both the empty throne atop which Imu sits and the figurehead of world government ships feature lion-based heraldry, much like the British Empire, the very same nation which sanctioned Caribbean buccaneers during the 17th century. This may tell us that the current rulers of the world government, most notably the secret king who sits atop the empty throne, once sponsored the Buccaneers as agents of the crown. Thus, the Buccaneer race committed a great crime against the world, guilt by association with JoyBoy, who refused to hand over the sea's greatest treasure. This schism catalyzed a war of epic proportion, at the end of which Imu and the 19 other monarchs he united prevailed, and JoyBoy was executed, but not before his will was passed on and his final message was scattered to friends and allies all over the world with the help of Nefeltari D. Lilly. If the Buccaneers of JoyBoy's era indeed sailed under the flag of the Nerona dynasty as privateers, it would be all the more tragic that Bartholomew Kuma, the last of his people, was forcibly drawn back into the service of the same evil king, as a member of the Seven Warlords. Yet just as JoyBoy protected the One Piece, Kuma was able to dramatically alter the course of the world's future by saving the lives of the Straw Hat Pirates, the ones who will ultimately bring about Imu's downfall. The question of how JoyBoy and the Forgotten Kingdom were toppled warrants an entire video unto itself, but the answer lies in the simple fact that not all pirates share in Luffy, Roger, and JoyBoy's ideals. One Piece is ultimately a story about the pursuit of freedom. Luffy lives free as a pirate, free from the authority of any political institution, but he doesn't particularly advocate that the entire world should live as he does. In fact, Oda has thought very deeply about what piracy means to the broader One Piece world. Piracy is a vehicle to pursue freedom, consistent with the central theme of the series, but theme and narrative is a question, not an answer. It's an argument explored before a conclusion is reached. Luffy is grappling with these questions, particularly in the New World. Is piracy really the answer to the world's problems? Is it the key to turning the world upside down? Is freedom even good or worth fighting for? How much freedom is too much? Who protects other people's freedoms, and what happens when one person infringes on another's? These aren't easy questions to answer, and no perfect human solution exists. There's no utopian structure for society which guarantees that freedom will always be evenly extended to all, and any governmental body requires constant vigilance and involvement from all of its people to ensure that autocracy doesn't take hold, because individuals who want to seize wealth, power, and authority for personal gain are always present. In a world where the institutions of power have tilted toward tyranny, waving the Jolly Roger by contrast represents a choice to live free, and may be viewed as a moral virtue, even an imperative. As we discussed earlier, the Buccaneers who sailed under the banner Liberty, Equality, Fraternity acted as a spiritual precursor to the French Revolution against its tyrannical noble class, founded on those very same principles. But piracy is a virtue only so far as that freedom is used to do good, not to do evil. After all, governments and laws ostensibly exist for a reason, and that's emphasized by the very fact that Luffy isn't the only type of pirate. Oda painted a morally complex world right from the outset of the voyage. The line dividing good and evil doesn't evenly parse between pirate and marine. The very first story arc introduced both Shanks and Alvida, Morgan and Kobe, good pirates and bad marines, good marines and bad pirates. Fittingly, Luffy's greatest rival for the Pirate King's throne is Blackbeard, not Akainu, and Rogers was Roxy Zebek, not Garp, pirates who directly challenged their views of the world. In early drafts of Romance Dawn, Oda considered formalizing the distinction between two brands of pirate, Peacemain and Morganeer, but elected the simpler and more elegant approach of allowing readers to intuit a character's morality based upon their actions. But nevertheless, this distinction still exists within the story. Importantly, this tells us that JoyBoy likely faced a similar predicament on an even greater scale, as he built a global coalition united under the Jolly Roger. He sought to unite all pirates in the world for a common cause. Undoubtedly, some brought into this fold held contrasting ideals, and intended to abuse their newfound liberty for personal gain, just like Blackbeard and Rocks. Notably, the name Oda originally considered attaching to this brand of piracy, Morganeer, was inspired by Welsh privateer Henry Morgan, who, as we discussed earlier, was allied with the real-world Buccaneers. If indeed JoyBoy was a Buccaneer, this could mean that his adversary was once an ally, based on Henry Morgan. While his Buccaneer compatriots were eventually branded as criminals and lost their government-sanctioned status, Henry Morgan, who led a brutal raid on Panama, was instead rewarded with a knighthood and was made Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica, where pirate stronghold Port Royal was once located. So perhaps in similar fashion, Full of Lead was taken over by JoyBoy's cutthroat Morganeer ally turned adversary as a reward of sorts for actions in support of the Nerona crown. We see in the modern day that Blackbeard's ambition is to turn the pirate island Full of Lead into a world government-recognized nation, a goal which was perhaps shared by a primordial Morganeer predecessor during the Void Century. This fits with my assertion that all of the Emperor's ambitions and dreams are dark reflections of the world JoyBoy was trying to create. Big Mom envisioned a future where all of the world's races could live in harmony. Kaido sought to raise up a mighty army such that the weak celestial dragons can no longer reign through wealth and influence. And Blackbeard seeks to upend the structure of the world by raising up a nation of pirates. As embodiments of the shadow archetype, these characters represent twisted versions of what a hero like Luffy could become. Each emperor's seemingly noble ambition is corrupted by a tragic character flaw, which invalidates their claim to the Pirate King's currently empty throne. Perhaps then JoyBoy's kingdom collapsed from within, fueled by a fundamental schism with an adversary patterned on Henry Morgan, thus explaining why Oda originally intended to use this name to define the evil brand of piracy to which those like Blackbeard and Rox Dizabek belong. St. Emu Nerona couldn't corrupt JoyBoy, but perhaps his Morganeer adversary wasn't as resistant to temptation. Maybe prompted by Emu, he agreed to misuse one of the ancient weapons, thereby instilling fear of JoyBoy, the Buccaneers, and the ancient kingdom throughout the entire world. JoyBoy's ambition to liberate the world was thus compromised, as 19 other noble families joined Emu in standing against JoyBoy's coalition, united by the fear this ancient Morganeer caused. Maybe it was even Zunisha who helped this evil pirate carrying out said attack, even unwittingly, thus explaining how it betrayed its companion JoyBoy, and was subsequently cursed as a form of penance. This led to a brutal global war, and ultimately JoyBoy himself was captured, and much like Goldie Roger, was executed for his crimes against the world government. Notably, inside Kuma's church, we saw the sun emblem, referred to in Lily's letter as the symbol of the dawn, or the world's liberation, placed at the center of a cross. Despite the lion-based heraldry, more commonly associated with the British Empire, Emu of the Nerona dynasty's name is derived from Roman Emperor Nero. Perhaps it's no small coincidence that the Roman Empire commonly used crucifixion, most significantly against Jesus, under the authority of Governor Pontius Pilate. Of course, as the Gospels record, the story doesn't end there, as Jesus rose from the grave on the third day following his execution. Thus, in the real world, the crucifix is displayed by Christians as a symbol representing the death and resurrection of Christ. Yet the significance of the crucifix symbol, seen frequently throughout the One Piece world, has remained an interesting question. The One Piece world is not our own, so it's not entirely clear what the cross symbolizes absent its real-world cultural and historical context. The crossguard on Mihawk's cruciform blade Yoru, meaning knight, even features the same ornate flourishes on its ends as the cross on the wall of Kuma's church. Even more significantly, we saw the same cross-like symbol on both Oar's clothing and the walls of Emu's vault. Notably, in the modern day, although Miasgard died by the sword, he was first crucified by Garling and the world nobles. All of which is to say that crucifixion may have been the Nerona dynasty's execution method of choice. If so, the crucifix in the One Piece world displayed in Kuma's church may have gained its symbolic importance because JoyBoy was crucified. The sun emblem placed at the center of the cross represents the fact that the one who was entrusted with the will of the sun god Nika was crucified. But just as Christians believe that the Messiah was resurrected and will come back again in the future, those within the One Piece world, like the Buccaneers, Lunarians, Fishmen, Minks, Samurai, and Giants, await JoyBoy's eventual return. which may be symbolically represented by Luffy reawakening the same power of Sun God Nika. Unlike Jesus, despite the incredible strength wielded by the Buccaneers and the mythical zone fruit in his possession, JoyBoy was not God, but was instead just a mortal man. As the lyrics of Banksaki read, "Doesn't matter who you are, someday you'll just be bones." His life and adventure ended in defeat, but like Roger, JoyBoy faced death with a smile, because he understood that his will would someday be inherited, and the same Nika fruit which enabled him to fight as a warrior of liberation would reawaken, signifying his return. Taking inspiration from another pirate legend, JoyBoy's final message was recorded on the poneglyphs, and much like Olivier Levasseur's cryptogram, tossed from the execution scaffold, was left for the world to decipher. Unbeknownst to the wicked Emu, Nefeltari D. Lily was in truth JoyBoy's ally. She used her authority among the 20 kings to gain access to said poneglyphs, and by some power, perhaps the very same paw fruit which Kuma now wields, scattered them to friends and allies throughout the Grand Line. Maybe JoyBoy even turned himself over for execution to help carry out this plan to protect the poneglyphs, and to pave the way for his future successor, much like Gold Roger. The closing lyrics of Banksaki describe the melancholy parting of a group of friends who know they'll never meet again, coinciding with the setting sun, a symbol of both the decline of JoyBoy's era and the death of the one who wields the Nika fruit. Yet they took heart knowing that the moon would rise to guide adventurers through the approaching night. As Roger stated, "Dreams, inherited will, and the destiny of an age will persist as long as people hunger for freedom." JoyBoy knew that someday a person fit to inherit his will and the treasure left behind would take up his mantle. They too would be guided to the end of the sea by these very same immutable forces: destiny, dreams, and inherited will. Before they disbanded, his crew took the name D as a permanent symbol of their fellowship, passed down through the generations. His friends and allies around the world now protect the poneglyphs and ancient weapons, the tools needed to chart the course to One Piece and upend the structure of the world. They're symbolized by the moon, a reflection of the sun's light through the 800-year-long night which followed the rise of Emu and the world government. Toki said to the people of Wano, "You are the moon unaware of the dawn." But as Petro told Carrot, there is no night which doesn't end in sunrise. I suspect Emu's victory ultimately came at a heavy cost. He still hasn't achieved that which he most desires, as JoyBoy and crew succeeded in keeping the One Piece safely hidden away at the end of the sea. He now rules from the shadows, perhaps cursed in some form like those inflicted with Sapphire Scale, unable to endure the sun's light. The perpetual sunlight in Marijois and Enies Lobby could then be viewed as a form of prison, trapping Emu inside his castle. He has all the authority in the world, but can never leave. Ivankov suggested that the Mortal King, Emu Nerona, has lived for 800 years thanks to the immortality operation, which seems like a reasonable assumption. He's an ancient king kept alive by unnatural means, but cursed with terrible pain, who despite sitting on the empty throne, hasn't yet fully conquered the world seas, and thus is forced to rule from the shadows as he works in secret toward his ultimate goal. Yet the mystery may run even deeper. The Red Wall was constructed long before the Void Century, as evidenced by the Lunarians' fallen land of gods, and the Buccaneer JoyBoy was channeling the power of Sun God Nika, whose legend originates thousands of years before the Buccaneers sailed the seas, potentially under the flag of the Nerona dynasty. So too then might Emu channel the power of a wicked, supernatural force belonging to the world's prior epoch, before the dawn of the Sea Circle. Maybe he too is the wielder of a mythical zone power, invigorating the will of a primordial, evil oppressive force, the true devil of the One Piece world. So exactly who or what is Lord Emu? Where did the devil fruit enter the picture? How and why was the will of Sun God Nika bound to a mythical zone power? All of these are questions for another video. What we know for certain is that JoyBoy's tale ended with the dispersal of the poneglyphs, but Luffy has now arrived to fulfill the many long-held prophecies of his eventual return, and as the cross and sun symbolizes, also represents the reawakening, rebirth, or resurrection of Nika's will. The Buccaneer period of the 17th century coinciding with JoyBoy's era in the One Piece world only served to presage the later push toward liberty, as autocratic monarchs began ceding power to democratically elected bodies, often by way of violent revolution, in both their foreign colonies and at home. In the same way as the Caribbean Buccaneers, JoyBoy's efforts to transform the world ultimately ended in his demise, but set the stage for the approaching New Dawn, which will almost certainly require a revolutionary war against the world government and its tyrannical ruler. Yet the real-world events Oda has used for inspiration also serve as a cautionary tale, and suggest there's a good reason that a warrior of liberation in the mold of Monkey D. Luffy is the only one fit to lead this revolution as the world's next pirate king. The French Revolution, which as we've discussed at several points throughout this video, was ideologically linked to the real-world buccaneers, was infamously bloody. Centuries of oppression and disenfranchisement violently erupted in a time known as the Reign of Terror. Though the grievances of the Third Estate were more than reasonable, the fight for justice and liberty crossed the line into class vengeance, with corporate punishment exacted on the entirety of the aristocracy, which ultimately led to the rise of Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. In similar fashion, centuries of abuses by the Tsars of Russia led to the brutal slaughter of not just the Romanovs, but many ordinary landowning farmers, and facilitated the rise of a despot like Joseph Stalin. History tells us that the way victory is achieved matters. Centuries of oppression breed resentment, which erupts in times of revolution in violent and destructive ways, and thus risks undermining the very liberty the people hope to achieve. We've already seen such rumblings in the One Piece world, as people celebrate the death of Alabasta's king Nefeltari Cobra. Though Cobra was both an honorable king and a good man, centuries of oppression have bred a violent resentment which won't be easily dispelled. And from what we've seen, Dragon and Sabo, the leaders of the Revolutionary Army, seem content to allow this anger to fuel their revolt against the world government. Throughout the New World, Oda has repeatedly emphasized the destructive influence that such cycles of resentment and revenge can have on a society. Hody Jones was the end product of the Fishmen's grudge against humans, predicated on the very real and horrible abuses they'd suffered over the centuries. Hody does not invalidate the suffering of the Fishmen, but his aimless quest for vengeance risked undermining their push toward freedom, and ultimately, he was proven to be formless and void of substance, an empty vessel of revenge and hatred. The same can be said of Kanjuro and Orochi, monsters bred by the corporate persecution of the Kurozumi clan in the wake of the crimes committed by their ancestors. Similarly, Don Quixote Doflamingo was made an even worse villain by the violent treatment his family received after they descended to the blue seas below. To be clear, war is always devastating, but will likely be the only way the world government can be toppled and Imu prevented from achieving his ultimate goal, whatever that might be. Yet the people of the One Piece world must be careful not to follow a similar path, else they may be doomed to repeat this same cycle of abuse and hatred. It's for this very reason that Nika chose someone like Luffy rather than Dragon to take up JoyBoy's mantle. The world needs a pirate king, rather than a radical revolutionary. Like JoyBoy, Luffy doesn't seek vengeance, and is even willing to fight beside those who wronged him in the past, like Buggy and Crocodile. As Pirate King, he doesn't want to conquer or rule the sea. He doesn't want to conquer or rule anything. His greatest strength is his ability to make friends and allies wherever he goes, including the very same peoples like the Minks, Samurai, and Fishmen who stood beside JoyBoy during the Void Century. The Straw Hats are uniquely qualified to unite those same forces in the war which Oden warned would be great enough to split the Season 2, in order to overcome the overwhelmingly powerful forces of darkness led by Lord Imu. But perhaps more importantly, they can also temper the more radical, revolutionary voices which will attempt to exact vengeance against all those who have wronged them over the past 8 centuries, and anyone guilty by association. This same resentful and bitter spirit inspired the world government to commit genocide against Kuma's people, the Buccaneers, for their mere association with JoyBoy. In order to establish a lasting peace in the wake of the final war, the world can't repeat the same crimes as their enemies. This is the very reason Luffy was chosen as the warrior of liberation, capable of delivering the world's new dawn, and at last completing that which the first Pirate King JoyBoy of the Buccaneer clan started 800 years before Luffy set sail. In the same way that the Buccaneers of the Caribbean championed the cause of liberty and democracy before the revolutionaries in France and the American colonies, so too did the Buccaneers of the One Piece world lay the groundwork for the revolution which will only be completed when the new dawn at last arrives, championed by the man who inherited JoyBoy's will. Like JoyBoy, Luffy will unify people from all over the world to fight for a common cause under the Jolly Roger, as the world's next Pirate King. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please leave a like. If you want to be notified when future videos are posted, please consider subscribing. It really helps this channel grow, and I really appreciate your support. But most important, make sure you let me know what you think down in the comments.